I'm getting kidney stones. Has that got anything to do with a carnivore diet or eating more protein or meat or anything?
Well, I think that it happens is because of the
Dr. Jacob Torres, one of the world's leading voices on kidney health.
He's exposing the lies and showing you how to regain control of your kidneys.
if things aren't going well in the kidney, then nothing else really works. Calcium oxalate, these things, they form these little crystals and they jam up the kidney tubules, so the inflammatory pathway gets turned on, the kidney's going to be injured.
Do you know what is the safe daily oxalate intake for somebody that doesn't have kidney problems?
Gram to gram and a half, somewhere in that range. It depends on
Does a high-fat diet help with polycystic kidney disease?
the experiments I did. Yes, there was an improvement in kidney function in the 3 months that they were on the diets. But then that also was interesting that it correlated with the BHB level. So those who had a deeper ketosis saw better improvements. Ketogenic diets are also anti-inflammatory. So anytime you have a anti-inflammatory mechanism, kidneys are going to be much better off.
How many people have kidney damage but don't even know it? High blood sugar and insulin resistance, protein. Does high protein destroy the kidneys?
This is similar to the cholesterol argument.
When we think about health, most of us worry about heart attacks, stroke, or even fatty liver disease. But one vital organ that is often overlooked is our kidneys. And shockingly, over 35 million Americans have some sort of kidney failure, and most don't even know it because the symptoms are silent until it's too late. My guest today is Dr. Jacob Torres. He's a metabolic scientist who has spent decades researching kidney disease, and he will share how many so-called healthy foods that we're eating every single day is actually harming not just our kidneys, but our entire body. And we'll also dive into groundbreaking new research showing how a high-fat diet, yes, high-fat, can actually protect kidney function and even help reverse kidney damage. So Dr. Torres, my first question, what are the worst so-called healthy foods that we're eating every single day that is damaging our kidneys and also our health?
Well, I think that there's a few that are come to mind for me immediately, and the one of them I studied in grad school was calcium oxalate crystals. Those are these little microcrystals that are formed from compounds of oxalate with some other ions. So it can be magnesium or calcium. Usually it's calcium though in the body. But these things, they form these little crystals and they jam up the kidney tubules and they kind of occlude the kidney, and there's a mechanism that the kidney to remove them. And this is what I studied in grad school, is that it looks like the kidney tubule actually expands in order to let these things through. And in order to do that, they have to activate these pathways that are involved in inflammation. So the inflammatory pathway gets turned on, it kind of dilates the tubule, and then the crystal is cleared. But that dilation process, during that time period, the kidney is going to be injured. So the tubule no longer is going to be doing its normal function, which is pulling up water and keeping track of solutes in the blood. And so the function is going to go down during that period of time that there's a crystal there. And so this can be really damaging. And these are these are found commonly in lots of foods. So I'm sure a lot of people might be familiar with the almonds, spinach, lots of green vegetables. They're everywhere. They're all over the place, and we make them as well. So there is an endogenous production of oxalate. So we can handle some amount of it. We've evolved to handle it. It's not like we have to avoid them at all costs. But excessive oxalate is really the issue there. The other one would be uric acid. I think uric acid is a big issue as well. Some people are familiar with gout, is like the uric acid crystals that can form in the joints. These also form in the kidneys, and they are similarly damaging, but for a different reason. And we have have another member of my lab who's working on this, and he's been kind of carrying on the work of crystal injury in our lab in the kidneys with PKD. And we find that these are also very damaging. So uric acid comes from things like fructose, for instance. So high sugary drinks are a big source of it. You can also have phosphate crystals, which are things like phosphoric acid. So Coca-Cola has I'm just going to say it because it's kind of like the main thing is a lot of phosphoric acid and a lot of fructose, which contributes to these crystal formation in the kidney. So those are the big ones. The other big ones are advanced glycation end products. So things that are coming out of heavily fried food. Those are really bad for kidneys. So things like that are like the like breaded and fried. Those things can those cause immediate damage, like after they make it into the blood, because there's receptors that respond to the advanced glycation end product, and they cause a similar inflammatory pathway. So anything that triggers inflammation, that's going to cause it's going to cause kidney problems, at least transiently, or if it happens over the long term, then you know, with a chronic issue that will definitely lead to kidney problems.
Okay, I do want to mention I've got a list of foods here. So the initial foods that you mentioned, foods high in oxalates that cause oxalic acid, the crystals that go into the tubular of the kidneys. But I think people don't realize how much oxalates are actually in some healthy foods. Spinach, like this is very surprising. Spinach per 100 grams, it's got 970 milligrams of oxalates. Okay, almonds. So you mentioned almonds. 450 milligrams. And I'm going to mention how much people need to be having as well. Peanut butter and peanuts. Who doesn't have peanut butter and peanuts? 180 milligrams of oxalates. Dark chocolate, many people, 75 to 85% dark chocolate, 120 milligrams of of oxalates. So do you know what is the safe daily oxalate intake for somebody that doesn't have kidney problems?
It's not that much. If I remember right, it's somewhere about the like a less than a gram to gram and a half, somewhere in that range. It depends on, how it's the salt. So this is okay, there's another consideration or caveat. So there's soluble versus insoluble oxalate. So the insoluble stuff is the free oxalate, and that's this thing. It's not bound to anything. So sometimes you might be consuming oxalate in a form that is not, it's going to be excreted rather than absorbed. So that can make a difference. The problem is that there's no real good way to report that on you know, getting a hold of this information is going to be really tricky, like which is the soluble versus insoluble. And you're going to probably go crazy trying to figure out like how much insoluble oxalate you're consuming versus soluble. So avoidance is easier because just total oxalate's a way to think about it. But if I remember off the top of my head, it's somewhere between a little bit less than a gram to 2 grams is the most per day. I remember I did an experiment not that long ago, and I was using spinach. Spinach is the best way to get a hold of a lot of oxalate, and it is about a serving of spinach was about the most oxalate you're supposed to get in a day, if I remember off the top of my head. But that's kind of like a good, it's 100 grams of spinach is a very like a small little like a little dish of spinach. Is not that many leaves overall. And if people are familiar with when you eat spinach, you kind of get that gritty sensation on the teeth. That's the oxalate binding to the to the teeth there. So you kind of can already feel that it's its effect. We're just from chewing it.
So it's also interesting, tea as well. So black tea is also high in oxalates. So it says here 50 to 80 milligrams in 1 cup. My mom has 5 to 6 cups a day. I have to tell her mom, like, that's high in oxalates, don't have it. So as you mentioned, there's a safe daily oxalate intake. So if somebody does have existing kidney problems, should they just be staying away from all of these foods?
Yeah, I think avoidance is a good idea just to lower the total burden that's possible. As an aside, just if you are consuming like tea, putting milk in your tea is probably a good idea because the calcium will bind to oxalate. Just it significantly affects it too, so it doesn't make it an insoluble form. So just if your mom does like milk in her tea, I don't know if she does that. That might be one of the reasons people do it. It's interesting that people do these things, and first it might not make a lot of sense, but maybe, when you think about it, it does bind up a lot of the oxalates. Maybe people figured that out a long time ago.
Interesting. Okay, so getting back to the oxalates, when somebody ingests these foods and then you have these crystals that form over time, so they go into the kidney, but how are they damaging other parts of the body? What is the pathway that you mentioned earlier?
When the concentration is significant, they can precipitate in other parts of the body as well. So the oxalate itself is a mitochondrial poison, so it can affect just energy production in general throughout the body. These crystals can just form in the connective tissue. They can form in different organs, and so it's just everybody can have similar exposure. It's just that the kidney has the highest exposure because it concentrates the blood into these tubules. So they precipitate there because the pH and the water and the solute concentration is sufficient to precipitate them. So they're much easier to precipitate. But if you have a high concentration of oxalate in the blood, they could precipitate anywhere.
I have a carnivore group and people say to me, I'm doing carnivore and I feel like I'm oxalate dumping and I feel I'm getting crystals coming out of my eyes and crystals, all these different things. It could just be that they're moving on to a carnivore diet, getting fat adapted, and then maybe they're excreting toxins from, doing their previous diet. It's not just the oxalates, but it's all these different things that people talk about oxalates. So it's very interesting, and the impact on the kidneys. And later on, I want to talk about some easy swaps that people can not have those foods and other healthy foods when we talk about what to eat. I do want to understand about the kidneys because I think people might not think about their kidneys and their kidney health and are their kidneys failing. Why do you think people should care about their kidneys, not just their heart, brain, and their liver?
I always find this question funny. It's just because the kidneys are, I do notice that people do not think about kidneys the same way they do other organs. I would argue that all organs are valuable in in their own way, and probably equally so. I don't know if I'd want to go without any of them at any point. But the kidneys are, I think, they're very well studied. But the way that they're thought about is that with this is a very kind of a concept across science, is that we oversimplify the function of the organ, and so we kind of just neglect like what it does, and so we kind of tier rank certain organs as being more valuable over others because of their functionality and their rated importance or perceived importance. And kidneys are kind of just think about as filtering water. I think they're kind of like the water organ. They kind of don't really, what are they doing really? They're just kind of like sitting there and pumping water or filtering the water. But they're all, they're an endocrine organ. That's where the adrenal glands are located. So they are, intimately tied to all of the other processes that are going on in the body. There's I also study the gut as well, and so the gut and the kidney are intimately related as well. That there's a lot of signaling going back and forth between them. So what's happening in the gut and the kidney they're constantly talking to one another based on like what's being produced in the gut is affecting the kidney function and vice versa. So I think that the kidney is very important. That's why you have two of them. It's so important. You need to have a backup that in case the other one fails, you have the ability to keep filtering. And it's just I think it's a very important organ for just overall health, because if things aren't going well in the kidney, then nothing else really works. So I think that's the other problem. It's also a very highly ketogenic organ. I think that people don't know that as well. It is, besides the liver, the kidney is the other organ that's producing ketones, but it's not producing them in a way that is affecting the systemic circulation. It's kind of, they produce them internally and kind of keep them there and consume and recycle them. So there are some effects of ketogenic diets that alter the kidney function as well, pretty drastically. It also can control the serum fatty acid concentration. I think people don't know that about the kidneys because they are a very oxidative organ, and if serum concentration of fatty acids goes up, it actually will store a lot of those in lipid droplets to kind of release them back into circulation. So it kind of is a buffer from high serum fatty acids. And it's also one of the reasons why you get these diseases like from diabetic kidney disease. It's just when fatty acids go too high, you start to actually over accumulate these lipid droplets, and they can cause a lot of damage. So it does a lot of things that are kind of like go unnoticed. I think that's the thing that is just kind of just tirelessly working away.
Well, as I said, I didn't understand the importance of the kidneys. And, my stepmom, she actually has PKD, which is polycystic kidney disease, and that's where you have cysts that hang on around the organs. And it's just, terrible if somebody has that. And no doctor would say that you can actually reverse or slow down PKD or any chronic kidney disease with a high-fat diet. And that's what we're going to talk about, the evidence around that, because that's going to give people hope that no matter what problem they have, even pertaining to their kidneys, that there is hope. You mentioned serum fatty acids in the kidneys. What does that mean?
So you have fatty acids, so the serum is the component of the blood that everything else besides the red blood cells and the other blood cells are located in. So it's just kind of the extra stuff, has the water and the ions and everything else in it, and all the other extra proteins. And the fatty acids are carried in the blood on certain proteins that transport them around. And so they're released during fasting or during, like if you have a high fat diet, they will be also increased. And the kidney kind of can buffer the amount that's in the blood. And so if you're fasting, these lipid droplets will form inside of the kidney because the serum fatty acids go up really quickly. And then the kidney will then hold on to some of them so they can kind of slowly release them and also use them for energy itself. So it has like a dual function.
Now, as Dr. Torres mentions, our kidneys are incredible at using fat for energy, and we really need to pay attention to all of these toxins, including oxalates that not only destroy our kidneys, but also our entire body. And this conversation extends to other aspects of our health, including the toxins that we put on our skin. Because whatever you put on your skin penetrates what's called the blood-brain barrier. That means it can get into your cells, causing disease. Now, when I found out about this, that changed everything for me. Because as you know, I followed a high-fat carnivore lifestyle for the past 5 years. But I still didn't realize I was still exposing my skin to chemicals through my everyday skincare. And I used to use 10 different skincare products, but now I only use one. It's 100% natural, chemical-free tallow balm. Now you might be thinking, Rina, why would you put tallow on your skin? Well, this has helped my skin so much. It's helped it to stay hydrated. It's improved the skin texture, as I generally have very sensitive acne-prone skin. This has helped me so much, and that is why I created the Primal Tallow Balms as a chemical-free solution for your skin, but also for my skin. Primal Tallow Balms are made from 100% grass-fed, grass-finished tallow that naturally contains vitamins A, D, E, and K2. So what does that mean for you? Well, you could experience better skin moisturization, hydration, and better skin texture. And the best thing is, there's no nasties, there is no preservatives. It is just pure tallow. And I like to use this unscented balm every single day. Just one dollop lasts me 24 hours. So if you want to be chemical free from the inside out, pick up a tallow balm. Just head to shop.theprimal.com and get 10% off your next order. There's also a link in the description. I want to ask a big question that people have in the ketogenic carnivore realm, which is about protein. Does high protein destroy the kidneys?
I don't think so. We did a review on this not that long ago, just to kind of get this question, kind of settled in this review article we wrote, specifically for PKD and triggers for damaging. So, a co-author, the first author of this paper, Melina Messing, she's a postdoc in our lab. So if you're looking for this paper, it's out there. It's called Trigger Warning. So it's on our lab website. But we looked at this topic specifically because it comes up a lot that there's protein is damaging the kidney, and I think the issue is that you get this thing when you have high protein intake on a short duration. You get it's called transient hyperfiltration, and so it's a constriction of the arterial that leads to so the kidney has these filtering mechanisms. So it has a glomerulus, and the glomerulus is being fed by the blood supply, and then the glomerulus is the kind of the beginning of the tubule, so we call it the nephron. So it's like the glomerulus. So anyway, it's coming in, and you have a certain flow right up from the blood that's coming in. It's due to the pressure that's being pushed on it. And if when advanced kidney disease occurs, you have this hyperfiltration that starts to happen, where the constriction of the blood vessel forces more blood pressure into the glomerulus, and it causes it to be damaged. So the cells there are sensitive to the pressure, and they can become detached from their actual foot process that's holding them in place. And then that's bad. That's bad because now the things can now flow through from the blood freely into the nephron. They're no longer being filtered. And so you can kind of start peeing out like proteins and other things. So you get proteinuria is a common symptom of advanced kidney disease, because those foot processes, those cells that are holding the glomerulus in place are no longer attached, and so things are coming through. And then you can measure that in the urine, and then that's it. That's how they would signal kidney disease. So they call that hyperfiltration is the start of that process. So the kidney function looks like it goes up, because they're actually pushing stuff like harder through that glomerulus. And when you eat protein, there is a similar mechanism transiently that occurs where filtration goes up, because there's certain amino acids are responsible for the constriction of the blood vessel, and so they will cause the filtration to go up. That is why that observation, this was back in the late 70s, early 80s, this observation was made. And I think even in the paper that it's mentioned in, says that this is probably not an issue with kidney function decline. And somehow it became that would accelerate kidney disease because it looks like the hyperfiltration that occurs during advanced kidney disease. So there was no evidence at the time to say that that was going to cause damage. The protein itself was damaging, but because it looks like the hyperfiltration that occurs from the kidney disease, people just made the conclusion that this is similar to the cholesterol argument. Like it's very similar type of story. And so studies since then have looked at moderate to high protein intake and have found that maybe there are examples of long-term high protein that, like kidney function maintains the same, but then decline is similar to people who had moderate protein intake. So they were saying like, it looks like it might be normal function, then it just kind of like looks the same later on, but it's kind of like goes up and it drops down similar to the way it did in moderate intake. And this is in like longer observational studies, not like, I don't think anybody's actually done the experiment, not like a controlled experiment, just that they've observed it. And they're in short-term experiments, it does not look like protein is accelerating kidney disease. Like they'll look at like low protein diets versus moderate or higher protein, and they do not look like they accelerate kidney disease or spare kidney function with lower protein diet compared to moderate to high protein diets. And so that's kind of, and this is in I think they're calling high protein like 1.2 grams per kilogram. I think that's or to 1.4. I think that's where they're calling high protein. Just be aware that it does not look like it does accelerate kidney disease in that range.
Okay, that's very moderate. 1.2 grams per kilo. I mean, I eat like 120 grams of protein a day. So like, and I'm like, 41 years old, normal, perfect kidney function. So, okay. So basically the protein has no correlation with damaging the kidneys. And then it's that extra filtration that happens, especially on the end stage kidney disease. If somebody has that, then they might say, oh, the protein is causing it, but there is no evidence that higher protein in that realm that you were talking about, 1.2 grams per kilogram, is causing any problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what it seems like. You do get, like I said, you do get this hyperfiltration that occurs immediately following a high protein intake because of these specific amino acids that are associated with the constriction of the arterial. But that's it.
And that's just a normal process.
That's a normal, that's a normal thing. Yeah.
Okay. So question for you. If someone's doing a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet, how much protein is safe for them so that, because I think people are worried, oh, if I have too much protein, it's going to damage my kidneys, even though you said it doesn't damage them. But how much is the upper limit that they could eat, like in grams?
That I don't know. I don't know what the upper limit is. Humans seemed pretty good at assimilating protein. It just from, it makes a lot of sense evolutionarily that we would consume quite a bit of protein. So we must have mechanisms to deal with large protein intake. I don't know if consistently day after day, if that's the way we're evolved to do it, because it seems like we might have, large bolus of protein, in a single sitting or a day or two, and then maybe don't have food for a few days, like kind of going back and forth. So it kind of plays into the the fasting part of the pathways. Maybe you need to rest the kidneys for some period of time, or maybe you need to, rest the digestive tract for some period of time in between. And then you're going to have like, ketosis in the meantime, kind of having another effect in there. So I don't know exactly what the day in and day out upper limit is. You can look at bodybuilders. They seem to eat a lot of protein day in and day out, and they are alive. I don't know how long, you got to look at the longevity studies on them. We don't have all that data yet. So that would be one way to think about it. And also without all those, anabolic steroid use, I think that's going to be another confounding factor.
I was thinking about the ketogenic and the carnivore diets, and I think because they have fatty protein, and it's the fat that kind of modulates that protein. So it's not the lean protein. And as you said, that the kidneys itself, if we're talking about protein and the damage on the kidneys, the kidneys really love fat, and they behave very well with ketones as their fuel as opposed to glucose. So maybe it's the fatty protein which carnivores tend to eat and people on a ketogenic diet tend to eat, which is quite good for your health and therefore your kidneys. Would that be plausible?
Yeah, there might be some other mechanisms there with eating the fat at the same time as the protein. I imagine that's a much different scenario than just consuming a protein shake that just only amino acids or only peptides. I think that's going to be a different effect entirely versus something that has to be digested, broken down into, its constituents and then assimilated along with fat, because fat also is serving as like the cofactors that help it digest as well. So I think that definitely would play a different role. And I think that's one of the problems with all studies is they rarely study whole food or the composition of foods, because it's just very difficult to tease apart the like what is actually going on when you start putting constituents together, just increasing your variables. So studies are generally done with only protein shakes. There are a few examples of protein meals where they do like where they do a plant protein versus an animal protein. I think there is like one experiment I can think of that was done that way to look at the hyperfiltration effect, but that's the only time I've ever seen things like that done. So I don't know.
I don't think that people are having much protein powder. Although, is protein powder okay for the kidneys if people are just having 1 or 2 of those a day?
I don't see why not. Protein powder would be bad. I mean, I like I just use whey protein because it's just like, bioavailable, easily digestible, and it's easily, it just seems fine. From all the studies I've seen, doesn't seem like it's like going to be a problem.
Okay, good. All right. I don't think people would use protein powders a lot, but just a question if it impacts the kidneys, doesn't seem that it does. Okay, question about kidney stones. Now, when people do a carnivore diet or ketogenic diet, I do see this sometimes in my carnivore community where they say, I'm getting kidney stones. Has that got anything to do with a carnivore diet or eating more protein or meat or anything?
Well, I think that it happens is because of the acid load. So the acid base balance is a thing that would be affected by high protein or high fat diets, and since they're excluding a lot of animal or all the plant products, you're not getting as much of the alkali. So alkalinity is the one of the effects of so I should say there are different types of stones. So just make sure that's clear, is that they're depending on the pH. So you have high pH, you're more likely to form one type of stone versus if the pH is low. And the pH I'm talking about is in the nephron itself, not the pH of the blood. So the blood pH, is very tightly regulated. So you're not going to affect that by, you could eat a lot of protein or a lot of fat, doesn't matter what you're doing. And the blood pH will stay very consistent because of the way that it's regulated. But in the nephron, that's when you have the reuptake of there's ions that are being reuptake. They're being kept in the nephron to kind of maintain the acid base balance. And then you also have the things like bicarbonate and citrate that are very important for maintaining the balance there. And so if you are not consuming any alkali, that means your potassium's a big part of this process. So if potassium is not as high, then you're going to have a little more acidic pH in the urine that's being produced, and then that can cause like oxalate crystals to form. So those are generally the main crystal that people run into when they're on a ketogenic diet. It's oxalate, and so it's because of this increase or the decrease in the nephron pH. So the way that people can overcome that is like potassium citrate supplementation. We formed a company, Santa Barbara Nutrients, that we may make a product that's specifically for this reason, for PKD, because this is one of the issues with PKD. So it's called Keto Citra, and it's BHB and citrate put together. And one of the effects of it is that it helps with alkalinity in the urine to prevent like the formation of these kidney stones. And also it has, BHB, which helps the kidneys. And that was, a lot of my research is based off of that. I'm sure you're familiar. So that's kind of the other way we get around this. So even though people are following ketogenic diet, we have that. I should also mention we have a ketogenic dietary intervention called Renew, and so that's also part of our company that we kind of restarted this program, and we have people supplementing with Keto Citra on top of the ketogenic intervention to prevent the formation of these crystals as well. So that's kind of the way that we get around it. And we've talked with our other collaborators in Germany, so that we did a ketogenic diet intervention. And so we have them, taking potassium citrate to prevent any negative effects when we did the study on PKD and ketogenic diets as well.
Interesting. Is there any other types of kidney stones? So you mentioned the oxalate kidney stones potentially coming from doing a ketogenic diet, but any other types? And you mentioned it's due to the pH, the type of pH. determine what type of stone it is? What's the other types of stones?
Well, uric acid was the one that I mentioned before. Those are and there's also calcium phosphate. So phosphate requires a higher pH, like a little bit higher than the. I think it's. I always have to forget these pH values, but I think it's a little over 7. And then uric acid, I think, also requires that more acidic as well. So they're just these are kind of that's kind of the one of the issues with when you're taking a lot of these like fructose or a lot of phosphoric acid in, is that it's going to also lower the pH of the urine, and that's going to help precipitate these stones.
Now, as Dr. Torres mentions, protein does not damage the kidneys. And if you really want to lower inflammation and fix insulin resistance while also protecting your kidneys, you need 2 things. You need enough protein and you also need enough fat, but you also need to drop the carbohydrates. And some people need to even go 0 carb. And with a 0 carb diet, or what's called a carnivore diet, I've seen hundreds of people reverse chronic health conditions, things like heart failure, diabetes, thyroid issues, and also losing so much weight. And I got the same results when I went carnivore 5 years ago. And what I found kept me and my community on track was medical support through carnivore doctors, because I had the same questions as you. Well, what about my cholesterol, especially my LDL cholesterol? How much protein and fat should I be eating? And that's why I created Go Carnivore. It's an online private community where you can ask any of your questions to your favorite carnivore doctors, including the ones that you see on this podcast. One of the best things about our community are our monthly challenges. We have challenges like our high-fat challenge, our dairy-free challenge, and our protein challenge. And this is where our members get the best results. So if you want to try carnivore with the medical support, just head to gocarnivore.com and try your free 14-day challenge and also get a free meal plan. There's a link in the description. I do want to ask about your work with the high-fat diet. So question for you. This is a very obvious question, but does a high-fat diet help with polycystic kidney disease?
Well, in the preclinical models, so the experiments I did, yes, it does help. And so we use rat models of the disease, and they seem to help and actually reverse the disease, which is something that has never been demonstrated with diet alone. So that was the first one. So it does look like it does do something. We also did a collaboration with the University of Cologne in Germany. So Roman Mueller and was one of the authors that we work with there, and he had his group performed the study, and they found that after a 3-month intervention, so it was comparing water fast ketogenic diet versus nothing, they actually saw improvements in kidney function. And when there was a further analysis that happened, they showed that it was correlated with the actual BHB level that was in the blood. So the greater the BHB level was, they saw better improvement. And there even was some MRI, they did this all by MRI to look at the kidneys, and there were some examples of reversal of of sizes of cysts. And so that was not enough. There was not enough individuals in the study to make it convincing that this is like real, but it was, we saw examples of it, and it did show that improvements in kidney function over that time period with a biomarker cystatin C. So it did seem like it was doing something, but it was a 3-month trial. And so we need to do another study and a long-term study. And that's where we've been trying to kind of get that ball rolling, because it's difficult to do these trials, and we really want to do a long-term study. But we do have some other interventions around the world that are underway as well. And one of them's in Japan. And that one also looks like it's, after 3 months has similar effects as the trial in Germany. And that's using the Renew program as the ketogenic diet interventions. So we're actually just testing the program itself and seeing how that fares out. And that seems to be working as well, just by the preliminary data that's come out. And that trial is going to be a couple years to it's finished. So it does look like, yes, it does work, but currently there's no evidence according to the mainstream medicine. That's what I hear.
Yeah, so that's what we were speaking about earlier about, is there actual evidence? I mean, you're talking about 2 studies here. So one in 2019 with animals. So it was rodents, I believe it was. Rodents, is that correct?
Yeah, so there's mice and rats in there. The ketogenic diet was in the rats. We did fasting in mice. And we had also had done caloric restriction prior to that was also effective in slowing the progression. And then that was kind of one of the things we thought maybe beta-hydroxybutyrate was responsible for that, because we could see that these mice, they like to, you give them the food for the calorie restriction, but they eat it all right away. So then they're just fasting for the rest of the time that they're there. So they're actually doing time restricted feeding in addition to their calorie restriction, and so not just calorie restriction where they're like eating it throughout the day. So that was kind of one of the observations we had that said that this is probably through another mechanism than just the caloric restriction. And the ketogenic diet also, there is no caloric restriction. They just are eating relative to their body weight the entire time. So we found that wasn't the main mechanism.
So if this is working at slowing down the progression of PKD, polycystic kidney disease, or even reversing it in some cases, is it possible that a high-fat ketogenic diet can actually protect someone's healthy kidneys?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's a good evidence to suggest that this is, a healthful type of diet, that this would be kind of beneficial. I did some more experimentation, so that's what I do. I just do a lot of experiments, and I published a couple of papers in the last few years. And one of them, we found that just we could supplement with BHB alone and get a lot of the benefits that we saw from the time restricted feeding. So we kind of repeated the time restricted feeding experiments in adult animals before they were only in the young animals. We saw again reversal of the disease, and kind of the kidneys got smaller, the cysts got smaller, the kidney function improved. We saw all those good things, and then we just gave them BHB, and we saw it's pretty much the same thing happen. A lot of the effects just from BHB alone was sufficient. So it looks like increasing BHB is good for kidneys in general, and even in wild type animals, you can see some kidney function improvement, and with using these diets and the BHB alone. So I would say it's probably beneficial overall. Ketogenic diets are also anti-inflammatory. So anytime you have a anti-inflammatory mechanism, kidneys are going to be much better off than otherwise, because that seems to be the main thing that takes them down is inflammation. And if you need any way you can reduce that, that's going to be beneficial to kidneys.
Okay, so we did mention the animal study in 2019, but you did mention there was a human small trial in 2022. So in case people are thinking, well, he only did it in animal studies, no, humans as well, and it showed the same thing. So I do want to center on this beta-hydroxybutyrate. Can you explain what that is and how that's different from, not different, but ketones, ketosis, beta-hydroxybutyrate?
BHB or beta-hydroxybutyrate is produced in the liver during fasting normally. So if the carbohydrates are restricted or absent, then over time the insulin levels will drop down, and then fatty acids are released from the fat cells. They make it their way to the liver, and then the liver starts breaking them down into energy, acetyl-CoA. And as that process continues, acetyl-CoA will elevate to the point when it no longer can kind of keep up with the amount of acetyl-CoA that's present. It'll start converting it into beta-hydroxybutyrate. And since the liver cannot consume BHB for energy, it just leaks into the blood supply, and then that's where the BHB comes from in the blood for the other organs, and primarily it's for the brain. The brain is the main recipient. Early on, other organs can use BHB, but if you're doing ketosis for a long time, those organs start to use fatty acids more than they do BHB. And so that's where the BHB is this kind of fat derived energy source. So it's an alternative pathway for storing energy or utilizing the energy from fat. I think that's the easiest way to think about it. So we call it a ketone, technically not a ketone because of its structure, but we call it a ketone still because it comes from acid. There's acetoacetate and acetone are the other things that are made during ketosis. And so BHB is the primary one we care about because it is the one that's kind of converted to energy and is a good store of it and for the other organs.
So that's BHB, because I think people have heard of beta-hydroxybutyrate, but they automatically think that's ketones. I need to be in ketosis.
People will put a lot of value in the blood BHB number, right? So people will measure their BHB and be like, oh, I'm not in ketosis because the BHB is not high in the blood. But that is not the relevant location for where BHB needs to be to do its signaling function. So if you're a person who's doing ketosis, you're in ketosis frequently, if you have small elevations in the blood or the serum BHB, that is probably that means you're in ketosis. Like there's still ketogenesis occurring. So say most people are in the, not readable. So like average person on the street, zero, like they're like undetectable levels of BHB. And then you have like an individual who exercises a lot, is pretty healthy, but they're not in ketosis for, like a ketogenic diet. They'll be at 0.2, zero 0.3 BHB. And that's a good sign. That means that the fat metabolism is functional and that if you're producing any amount of BHB, that means that fat's turning. Like it's actually, the liver is actually doing work to produce, it's consuming fatty acids. It's not just storing them or nothing's happening, right? You're not burning any fats. So that's a good sign. Then you're in ketosis, you might actually see like 0.6, 0.5, 0.7, like, they're like, people get dismayed because they're not in that 1.2, 1. Like they get really hung up on the number. But then that's probably not the real story. The real story is that the BHB is getting sucked into tissues, like it's being used up in places. It's actually doing stuff inside the cell rather than in the blood. It's not doing anything for you in the blood. That's just a pool of BHB. And if it's high all the time, that means that you're not using it. It's just kind of it's just sitting in the blood. And so in the kidney, it actually might be very high because the kidney is pulling it in, or it might be very high in the brain because the brain's pulling it in. And so it's the serum concentration is not as high. So if people are getting, the benefits of ketogenic diets and noticing differences, it's likely that you're probably just getting good at using the BHB or you're producing it probably, and it's just getting sucked up into different places. That's one interpretation. But it would be hard to say just from the reading alone what the effect is. But if you are getting very, very high BHB because you're trying to like a therapeutic intervention, that's going to be, then you are more concerned with the getting that number up really high because you're trying to actually do like a therapeutic intervention and you want like saturation to be occurring. So that would be a different interpretation of why you would want that number to be high.
Makes sense, because I always get this question because people think, so when they do carnivore or ketogenic, it's the main question. I test my ketones, why aren't they high? And therefore I'm not fat burning. That's not to do with the kidneys, but this is just a question that people always have. And as you mentioned, it's not even ketones or ketosis, it's beta-hydroxybutyrate. That is the main thing that you're talking about. Okay, a follow-up question. People talk about eating more fat like butter to increase their ketones and BHB. Do you think that works?
Probably. I mean, probably getting more fat is probably going to help with getting the ketones to come up, for transiently at least, I would think. If you eat too much, then it doesn't really make a difference. I don't think it's going to make a difference if you eat too much, because you only have so much ability to transport fat into the blood. Um, Fasting is probably the biggest way to increase your BHB though, because you're just that I think that's the one that is known to increase BHB the most. All the studies I've seen on fasting, you can get up to like 5 millimolar BHB after a couple days of fasting. So I think that's probably the most. If eating more fat can help, but I don't know if it's going to like accelerate things. It's just going to give you substrate.
Okay, interesting. Okay, because I have that question as well around how high can your ketones, or in this case BHB, go before it's too high, or what is too low? But is 5 too high of a number in that case for BHB?
I don't know. It's unclear if there's an issue with it, because people that have been studied on long fasting durations, they have this they have it kind of like escalate over a few days, and then they kind of get to like 5 or 6, and then it starts to go back down. So it's kind of like that initial ramp up is you're just making a ton of BHB, but it doesn't seem to have any ill effects. I can imagine there's probably scenarios where you start to get like 10 millimolar or 12 millimolar, you probably start seeing some issues because of just there's probably like I think there's an acid base balance thing that starts to occur. So that's like kind of that's why a lot of this associated with ketoacidosis is a big one. But that's in the context of diabetic ketoacidosis, where you have just high fatty acids, high BHB, high glucose, like everything's just up because nothing's working. You're just kind of dumping all these different substrates into the blood, trying to get something to work, and nothing's working. And that leads to a very dangerous acidotic state. So I think there might be some issues with super high levels, but other than that, I don't know if how transiently 5 or 6 millimolar is an issue. Because it will, if you're fasting, it's going to go back down. I don't think it can maintain that for long periods of time.
Okay, well, I learned something new. It's not about ketosis and ketones. It's actually about beta-hydroxybutyrate. That's the most important thing. Okay, let's talk about other things that can destroy the kidneys as well. High blood sugar and insulin resistance. How does that damage the kidneys?
The insulin resistance part is, I think there's going to be a lot of extra renal stuff that's affecting it. There are some things in the kidney, I think, that have some insulin resistant effects, but the main thing is that you end up with a high glucose environment, and then that has all sorts of negative consequences. Just having high glucose around. One of the main things that can happen is this glycation. So the glycation that we mentioned earlier about the related to the AGEs is important, but that's from like dietary intake. This is the actual glycation of the cells themselves. So you have this around all cells. They have a thing called the glycocalyx. I don't know if you ever talked about this before. So it's a kind of a forest of proteins that are on the extracellular side of cells, and then they have these modifications of sugar residues that are along these proteins, and they are very important for signaling from, like, they recognize self. So for one, like, you might have them a certain code that says this is me, so don't activate the immune system if you see this string of characters on this amino acid, or sorry, on this protein. And then that's one mechanism. They also need it for just docking of certain proteins, because they need to recognize the receptors that are there. They have specific glycations on them, or glycosylations, excuse me. The difference between a glycosylation is what the cell puts onto the protein as it's being made. But the glycation is the non-enzymatic addition of a sugar molecule. So you have these glycosylated proteins, which have all these very specific residues. And then as glucose goes very high, you have just a non-enzymatic addition onto these residues as well. And then that will change the code that's on the protein. And so now it no longer functions in the same way, and it actually can damage the cell, because now it doesn't understand, like, the extracellular signal that's going on. So it can damage the glycocalyx, and then you can also damage the internal machinery of the cell similarly if the glucose levels go too high. That's more regulated, though. Like, the glucose intracellularly is regulated due to the concentration of glucose that's extracellular to the intracellular side. So that is not as big a concern as just the high level of glucose that's being seen on the outside. And so the cells I mentioned earlier that are in the glomerulus, they're called podocytes. They have these little feet. They call them the foot process. So they kind of like make the barrier between the blood and the nephron. When they are exposed to high glucose, they become detached, and then that causes the damage from the high glucose in the blood. So those are kind of like the main mechanisms, I would say, are just high glucose, persistent high glucose for over long periods of time. That's probably the main one.
It's interesting with the heart as well, and heart attacks. I was speaking with Dr. Malcolm Kendrick about heart attacks, and he was saying it's the damage to the glycocalyx, which protects the arteries. So if you have damage to that, again, high glucose damages that. So I think it's the same across the whole body. High blood sugar, high glucose, eating sugary stuff, processed foods is going to damage every organ, including the kidneys. So next one, this is interesting. Medications, NSAIDs. So which is like ibuprofen. How does that damage the kidneys?
I don't know the exact mechanism. That's not one of the ones that I studied. I know that they do damage the kidneys. That's I don't know the mechanism exactly of how it's damaging, but I know that they have metabolites that I think are associated with the injury. So we covered this in our paper as well, but this wasn't my section, so I didn't go deep into the NSAID.
That's okay. What about PPIs? So that's like Nexium. If somebody has acid reflux and they take PPIs, is that like, do you know more about that, how that can damage the kidneys?
I do not know about proton pump inhibitors. I assume that if they inhibit the ones in the stomach, they'll probably also inhibit the ones in the kidney, which I would think is not good. And anytime you have any of these non-selective inhibitors, if they just broadly inhibit any of these particular ion channels, that's all the kidney does. It's a lot of ion channels. Spends a lot of energy controlling the sodium and potassium balance, the calcium, magnesium. And yeah, if you mess with any of those a lot of those pathways require, or those transporters require that protons are part of the exchange. So if you inhibit that, you cannot pump ions across the membrane. So I'd imagine that would be the mechanism if I just had to throw a guess at it.
Okay, next one you would know. Chronic dehydration. Why does that damage the kidneys?
That changes the solute concentration inside of inside of the nephron. So the more dehydrated an individual is, they might have to have more concentrated urine, and so the higher concentration can then allow precipitation of crystals for one. That's like that's a big one. But any other toxins that might be in there are going to spend more time being more concentrated in the nephron himself. So any other thing, it could be lots of different things that get filtered through. If the concentration goes up, then it could cause damage.
So when we talk about dehydration, so how much water should someone drink per day so that their kidneys are good and their health is good?
For PKD, it's higher because there's a pathway that's relevant to this, where it's vasopressin seems to be a big driver of PKD, and so the kind of counteracting vasopressin is part of the drinking more water, so that people will consume quite a bit of water per day. I think they're up to like 8 liters or something. It's a lot of they do drink a lot. It's something crazy. It's like a crazy amount of people drink water just ad libitum, and then uncomfortable amounts of water. I don't know. It seems like a lot.
That's a lot. But the average person should not drink 8 liters of water.
No, I think if I might be overstating that, but it's a lot of water that I've heard people drinking on it. But I don't. There is a recommendation for increased water intake and for PKD, and I personally think that our bodies are very smart. They tell us when we're thirsty for a reason, and so it's consuming not just water but minerals. I think that the minerals are the real thing for the kidneys that they need a lot, because the water is pretty well controlled in the by the kidneys, but they need ions to do it. So the amount of sodium and potassium is probably the more relevant factor when it comes to maintaining proper osmotic balance. And so if you drink water, that doesn't mean it's getting into your body. Like you could just be drinking water for water's sake, and now you're just going to pee out excess water, but also ions as well. So if you're not consuming sufficient ions, then I don't think it's that you're going to make a difference how much water you drink. It's really a combination of the two. I don't know what the actual recommendation is. I question all recommendations at this point, like what's good and what's bad. I don't know if there's good data to say like what the right amount of water is to drink. Drinking to thirst, if people are really in tune with their bodies, that's probably the right way to go. And using salt as part of whenever they drink water, if they're taking it with some salt, that's probably better than not. I like the Element. That's I like to drink those in the morning. Have one of a little sachet of that in the morning, because I used to just do sea salt, just put sea salt and lemon in water and drink that. I thought felt like that was sufficient to get enough ions and water in a day. But yeah, depending on your activity, right? How much you're sweating, how much you're talking, if you leave your mouth open all the time, then you're probably going to need more water. So there's a lot of considerations.
Okay, so question for you. I love talking about salt because for carnivores and people on a ketogenic diet, salt is so important. Do you have a recommendation of how much salt as a minimum? Because I know it varies, but as a minimum, how much should they have along with their water?
Oh man, I don't know. The minimum is hard to say because it's so based off of your activity level. I think that the important part is the ratio rather than the amount. So if you're consuming a lot of, most people are consuming way too much sodium. I think just in a processed diet. So highly processed foods they have a lot of preservatives that have sodium as the counter ion, and so the ratios get crazy. People are getting like 20-1 sodium to potassium or something, like some absurd amount of sodium, when they should be, I think, ancestral numbers. I think it's 3-1, 4-1, sodium to potassium. So potassium is I think a real big factor here, just that people don't get enough potassium in general. It's just, especially if you're just eating a regular standard diet, people are just definitely not getting the right amount of potassium in their diet. And that's one of the main controllers of blood pressure is the potassium. So the kidneys are regulating the blood pressure, and that's why supplementing potassium is so valuable, because it can control the blood volume very well. So as the excess sodium leads to more water retention in the blood, because it has to dilute the sodium concentration, because you have to keep sodium and potassium at very specific concentrations for everything to work properly. So as sodium goes up, the kidney will have to control that by absorbing more water to keep the volume up. And as you drop sodium down, then now you can excrete excess water, and then that will bring the blood pressure down. So the way you can do that is if you increase potassium, potassium will then cause sodium to be excreted, and then that will bring the level down as well. So in order to excrete potassium or sodium, you have to excrete potassium with it. So that's part of the mechanism of like how the pumps work. And so it's why just adding potassium to the diet for people that have high blood pressure brings down their blood pressure, because they just pee out the excess sodium that brings the blood volume back down. So it's a long way of saying I don't know what the right number is, because it's based off of how much potassium you're getting. But you need about, I think, 4 to 6 grams a day of potassium, if I remember off the top of my head. And so, you think you can kind of extrapolate, sodium, potassium at that point, how much you actually need.
Okay, well, that goes into the next section. Before I want to talk about what to eat instead to protect the kidneys and also fix the kidneys, is especially if you have chronic kidney disease. I do want to ask, because you have probably seen a lot of people following this ketogenic diet who have had kidney disease. Have you got any success stories?
Yeah, anecdotally, there's a number of people that follow this and seem to be doing quite well. A lot of in the PKD world, a stable kidney is good, because it's purported to be inexorable, that this is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow, and that at some point your kidneys become non-functional and huge, and they just have to take them out. So if you can have just a steady, no change year after year, that's success. That would be a great treatment if that worked that way. Reversal is unheard of in the field, so that would be also very unusual to see. So in the study for the study in Germany, there was an improvement in kidney function in the 3 months that they were on the diet. So they did see that there was people that were on the diet, PKD, they kind of saw a little bit of bump in kidney function. But then that also was interesting that it correlated on a further analysis. They correlated with the BHB level. So those who had a deeper ketosis saw better improvements. And on MRI, there were some examples of people that had a smaller cyst size after the 3 months. None of this was that wasn't statistically significant, because the spread was too large. But it does seem like anecdotally there's examples. We've had people that have done the Renew program that have said that they had either just no change or decreased rate, which is also relevant. Is if the rate stops going up as rapidly, then you preserve your kidney function over time. And some people have reported even some cysts getting smaller. So there are people that have said it. We have some documentation just anecdotally of some of these examples. And I think there's even a case report currently we're trying to write up on an individual who's had some success doing this protocol. So, I know a few people that have this as well. So I think that I think it's working anecdotally, which is, evidence, but not the kind that's needed to make it a widespread recommendation.
Well, the conventional approach is what my stepmom did. That she has PKD, and she actually had to have one of her kidneys taken out because obviously it was overgrowing too much and it was actually failing. And so now she has one kidney, and then she had a kidney transplant. But she was on these medications to, I don't know what the medications were, but it was really affecting her immune system.
Yes, you have to be on immunosuppressants for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So, if somebody can do a ketogenic diet or your program, even if it can keep the kidney function stable and not progress, that is a big win. Because if people have ever been around this condition of PKD, it's terrible. It's just something that progresses. The kidney function declines slowly because these cysts, it's like attaching over the kidney and it just grows and it just stops the function. It's just a horrible disease.
Yeah, they start to push onto the other organs as well. So you kind of get a feeling of like just fullness and discomfort because it's just literally they become so large that they start to just crowd out the other organs that are in your stomach, and that part feels uncomfortable. But I also on that note, I have heard people saying that they prevented going on dialysis during the time they were waiting for a transplant. So they had like a 2-year period. Like I talked to one person said that they had, they were waiting for a transplant and they were going to have to go on dialysis. They heard about our research. They went on the ketogenic diet and they never had to go on dialysis. And then they got the transplant. So even like that seems like a pretty beneficial effect as well, just not having to do on dialysis, which sounds, I mean, dialysis seems really rough. I would not want to have to go through that. So if you can prevent people from just even that process, that's really good. Or extending the time till they get the transplant, that also is a beneficial part of it.
So if somebody wants to, not just for their kidneys, but also protect their health and have good health, what should you eat on a ketogenic diet?
Oh, that's a good question, right? Because it's a big question mark. A lot of times, I think it comes up like what to eat. I think you're probably familiar is that there's people do ketogenic diets and the dirty keto. That I've heard that term used before, where you are technically getting the quantities or the amounts of the fats and protein and everything correct, but the composition of the diet is still very poor, and so you can always eat poorly. Like there's no endless there's an endless way that you can do that. So if you can be vegan and just eat Oreos and chips and stuff like that and never have to worry. So ketogenic diet's no different. There's a lot of processed foods, a lot of not just the just that you could eat peanut butter, right? You could just eat peanut butter and all sorts of other things that just are not that great. So I think the main thing is the fat composition should be a kind of a focus. So eating high polyunsaturated fat for keto is not great because it's just you're going to potentially push things into that pro-inflammatory state of fat metabolism. So getting good amounts of monounsaturated and good saturated fats as well. I think that's a big part of it. The saturated fats, I'm never really sure about like the amounts of saturated fats. I think it's going to be based off of kind of energy expenditure, like how much you actually are exercising and doing things like that's going to be relevant to how much fat you should be consuming from saturated fats. The monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated are more relevant because they're like the structural fats. They're going to be used more for the important signaling and structure function type things. So I would say kind of like prioritizing those over saturated is always a good idea. And eating whole foods, of course, I think is better than anything that's processed. So if you can get a hold of these fats in the forms of actual food, that's much better than having to do it in, I think, even butter or processed. Butter is minimally processed, but it's still a processed food. So you're kind of extracting the stuff out of the where its source was and then putting into something that you can transport or keep. But I think that's what would be my recommendation is just looking to whole food sources. I love avocados, so I think everybody always likes from California. So they're quite abundant here. But that's kind of like the go-to for a lot of people is avocados. But then, they have like olives, olive oil, things like that are fatty, other fatty fruits that are available. There's a few, not a lot, but there are a few that are available.
It's interesting that avocado is a fruit. So like when you said fatty fruit, that's what it means. And then olives as well. So just a point around the butter, because I think many people, they love butter, but as you mentioned, it is a processed fat, meaning that it's not coming in its whole food form. So that it is some processing involved. It's very easy to overeat. And one of our carnivore experts, Dr. Sean Baker, does say that lean on the fatty ruminant meats, the whole meats, as you're probably saying, as opposed to just butter. Because people, when they think about ketogenic diets, they think, I can just eat a whole lot of butter and lard. It's not just that. That is like a accompaniment to the meat. So for example, things like ruminant meats like steak, ribeye, beef, lamb, eggs, salmon, as you said, if you're doing more ketogenic, not just carnivore, avocado, olives, even some cheese if people can tolerate, but you're emphasizing maybe monounsaturated as well as saturated, staying away from the polyunsaturated. How does that sound? Is that a good summary?
Yeah, so there are certain there are required polyunsaturated fats. I think it's just that people coming from any standard diet will have probably be very high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fats. I mean, there are other polyunsaturated that are relevant and very important. It's that the majority of them come in the poly-6 form. So that's the ones I'm referencing when I say the poly unsaturated, just because those are, people are usually over dominate in those in their they're overrepresented in their bodies already. So if you're coming from a diet that was, just eating standard food, you're probably going to already be overrepresented in those. The longer you get into ketogenic diets, you'll have to have those. I mean, they'll come along with other things. They're very high in olive oil, for instance, has a lot of poly six as well. So you're going to get them in the diet. So that's why you just don't have to prioritize them. That's why I say that.
Yep. Polyunsaturated. So it encompasses omega-3s and 6s. So as you're mentioning, a lot of people can go really high in omega-6s, especially if they have like peanut butter. But you really want to prioritize omega-3s. So polyunsaturated is still good, but still you want to focus on omega-3s. Last question for you. Early warning signs of declining kidney function. What are some warning signs that people can visibly see that could indicate bad kidneys?
I think one of them is like edema. So just like or high blood pressure, those are kind of like the early signs of kidney function decline. I think that where high blood pressure, I think is an obvious one. I think people will be able to tell, but it is a little bit difficult to tell externally that the kidneys aren't working well. But lethargy is a sign that the kidneys are not functioning well, just because there's going to be a lot of extra, toxins or kind of metabolic waste products that are accumulating in the body, and then that can lead to things like brain fog and kind of lethargy overall. So those would be like symptoms that you might be able to detect before you start to see other symptoms of things going on. But that would be kind of a few of the early ones.
Okay. Last question. So I didn't ask you this. Important lab markers that people can know that they have kidney damage. What should they look at on blood test?
Okay, if they're doing a kidney function panel, people are probably familiar with the creatinine as like a marker. I think it's a poor marker because if you consume a lot of protein or if you are very active, that number will be elevated. So it could affect the actual the true kidney function value. A good one is cystatin C. So if that's something that people just want to know their kidney function, cystatin C is the one that they should ask for. That gives you a very good marker for kidney function. In the urine, there is a protein. So proteinuria is the thing people look for kidney damage, and albumin. So albuminuria. Those are the two markers of kidney function that it's actual damage that you'd be looking for. So if you don't see protein, that's good. If you don't see excess albumin, that's good. And then cystatin C is the one for function.
Okay. Is there any ranges that people need to know for those? Like, is it the standard ranges on a blood test? Because it's not like cholesterol where it's all over the place.
These are pretty well defined, these kidney function numbers. So EGFR is the estimated glomerular filtration rate. That's the thing that they use to calculate. That's based off of the creatinine. That's the number that they usually use. You can get a similar value from the cystatin C. And I think if people are above 60, that's normal to good kidney function. Some people will be in 90 to 100. That they can be really high. The chronic kidney disease is measured by the EGFR, like how high it is. So once you start getting down below 40, then they start to become in the early stages, and then as you start to get 30, the stages progress to based off of what the kidney function value is on the EGFR. So if you're still in the normal range, then that's fine. That's probably that's all you need to stay at, and that number will kind of fluctuate over time. So you get it as long as you're staying trending in the same range. That's good. Kidney function declines with age. Just be aware that I don't know how you're going to keep it high forever. It's probably just going to have some level of trail off over time. But preserving it is good. I mean, that's the kind of the goal, is just to kind of keep that rate of decline from accelerating.
Okay. And how many people have kidney damage but don't even know it?
Probably all of us. I imagine that all of us have kidney damage that we could not detect. I would think so. it's just it's seeing so much of the environment all day. You might have an exposure to a toxin that you would never know is that makes the kidney be injured. The thing is that you have a lot of reserve capacity in the kidney, so you wouldn't recognize damage right off the bat. Like if you had an insult to the kidney that caused a portion of it to be damaged, it could recover for one. Well, one other option is it might make a scar, so it gets fibrotic, kind of closes off that nephron and just becomes fibrotic. And you might not notice it because you have so much reserve capacity built in because there's so many redundant nephrons. So, over time, as you go through your life, you're going to have, I don't know how you get away from it. You're just going to be out in the environment. And so things are going to be, you're going to be exposed to toxins. And so it would be hard to say you're not going to have damage. I would find that any adult if you looked at it like an MRI, you'd probably find some spots. You might find a few cysts, even normal people, they get a few cysts just because that's a function of preserving like it's a mechanism to preserve the function of the kidney. So the cyst seems like a normal thing that can happen to individuals if there's an injury, but they'll be small. They won't be many of them, and they won't get super big. They'll just kind of like it's something that the kidney couldn't get rid of, so it just makes a little cyst around it, keeps it walled off. So if like a bacteria made its way into the kidney, you might have an infection, and the kidney needs to deal with it. So it just it doesn't have any way to get rid of it, so it walls it off and makes a cyst around it. That's something that can happen to from kidney injury.
Wow, I learned so much from you today about BHB and also about cysts, that even healthy kidneys have cysts. Dr. Torres, if somebody wants to find out more from you, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me at drjacobtorres.com. I have all my references and everything are there, or at least my papers are on there. Also, I'm at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in the Wimes lab. So they can always come to our lab page. So that's just Wimes lab. It's pretty easy to find. And we have a lot more papers from our lab there. And they also just can find us SantaBarbaraNutrients.com. That's our company's website. And that's where we have Keto Citra and the Renew program and everything else that related to that. So those are all the places you can find me, find our research.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm really hoping that people can get a lot of information here about kidney health and the role of a ketogenic diet in PKD, and your work is incredible. So Dr. Torres, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today on this episode with Dr. Jacob Torres. Now, if you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. You can also find me on other social media accounts. I'm on Instagram and on X under the name of The Primal Podcast. Now, if you love this episode, watch this one next with Dr. Ken Berry. It is all about how to reverse fatty liver disease and the 3 tests that every single person needs to know. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.